того, чтобы доставить эти продукты.
to deliver the products.
Брат Стив наш, он нам помогает, он собирает финансы.
Our brother Steve, he's doing fundraising and collect money.
Высылает на счет нашей церкви.
He's sending money to our account.
Мы осуществляем закупку.
And from church account we buy products.
Привезем. Есть. Вот такое у нас происходит.
And bring food to these families.
Great. Well, thank you so much for taking the time to talk to us. Steve, maybe this is a better question for you, but how can folks over here in the U.S. contribute? How can they help?
They can go to our website, rabbonislove.org, and click the give link and select the country Ukraine to give a donation to Ukraine. I want to advise people that their currency, now that they're in Germany, and a lot of the refugees have left, are in a much higher foreign currency. So it's going to take a lot of resources to help even keep the refugees alive. So, and we're building homes for these refugees out of shipping containers. So, a lot of resources are needed, but it takes about $10 to feed one person for the week. So no amount is ever too small.
Great. Thanks for sharing that. And I just want to say that, our thoughts and prayers are with you, and hopefully we can help end this soon and get support to the folks that need it.
Спасибо вам большое.
Thank you very much for your work, assistance.
Помогаете пройти нам это.
That you are helping to go through this situation.
Мы благословляем Соединенные Штаты,
the USA,
ваш народ,
your people,
что у вас открытое сердце,
that you have open hearts
чтобы, знаете, помогать тем странам,
to assist those countries.
И вы всегда придерживаетесь принципа свободы.
And you always have such principle as freedom.
Спасибо вам большое.
Thank you very much.
All right. So, the part of the interview that really struck me was that Pastor Yan has no doubt that the Ukrainians are going to win, and he's already looking forward to how they can survive afterwards with food, medicine. The bombs being dropped have devastated their farmland, devastated their communities.
That was the interview, the part of the interview that I found most interesting and also concerning in regards to Putin underestimated the resistance of the Ukrainian people. I think that's obvious from the interview we just heard, as well as just looking at the news reports. He's not used to losing. And now he's like a cornered rat. The world's against him. Will there be an overreaction? Will there be a provocation? Will there be something that could ratchet this already dangerous situation into something that we all fear?
Yeah, that's the big question. That's even Biden has been saying for a while. They're concerned about ratcheting it up. They're concerned about provoking. However, we did just get an alert. Apparently, President Biden has changed his language, and he has finally labeled Putin a war criminal.
Which is deservingly so. What's going on in Ukraine is worthy of him being a war criminal. And I don't want to harp on our initial point, but, as he becomes more isolated, as he's, condemned as a war criminal, what does he do? And then what happens inside Russia? Do the oligarchs, do others as the military take him out, especially if he loses?
Well, we've already seen, I believe that at last count, there were over 4,000 people in Russia that were arrested for speaking out against the war. And I'm sure most of our listeners have seen the footage of the news editor that went on the live broadcast with a sign saying, "Stop the war." she disappeared for a while. She did reappear in court, and now she has been sentenced to 15 years in jail for speaking out against the war. So, I mean, Putin's definitely fighting this on two fronts. He's got his own people that are starting to fight against him.
But let's be honest, Dr. Lopkin, he cannot survive a loss.
No.
I mean, there's no quarter for him.
No, there isn't. If Putin does not win this war, his people will remove him. The international community will remove him. So, I mean, he's done. And quite frankly, at this point, I don't see any way he can really win.
Oh, no, it's a great point. It's how you define a victory. I mean, even if he, let's say, has a military so-called initial victory, he's going to have an insurgency that would make Afghanistan, it would harken back to Afghanistan a la 1980s.
Absolutely. And, there's actually speculation that Putin expected this to go the way of the U.S. withdrawal in Afghanistan. He was thinking that his forces were the Taliban and they were just going to walk in and take over the Ukraine. And clearly he underestimated the will of the Ukrainian people to fight. And again, as Pastor Jan said, they fully expect to win.
Oh, and also, I like that point, but he's also overestimated the enthusiasm of his military. There's reports of, self-sabotage of vehicles, reluctance to fight. Don't you think he overestimated the enthusiasm on the other side?
Well, messages have gotten out from the Russian military, in particular, mostly the soldiers writing their families. And they've been telling their families they didn't know they were going to war. They were told they were going to be on military maneuvers and then all of a sudden found themselves invading Ukraine. So the soldiers weren't even told what was going on.
What concerns you most, Dr. Lopkin? Because I know what concerns me most, and it gets back to our previous discussion or discussion points is, to me, Putin's not a person and does not have the personality to just drop out like Richard Nixon in 1973. I mean, what is the end game? I mean, for him, it's almost like a Hitler-esque. It's either he's in charge or no one's in charge, literally.
Yeah, that is the big worry, is that when he realizes he cannot win, when he realizes that the world is stacked against him. I mean, basically, at this point, he has Iran and China on his side, and there's
teetering.
And there's questions about China's commitment to Russia, because now they're actually facing uprisings against the Chinese people in the Pacific with Australia. We're sending troops to Australia now because there's conflict there between Australia and China. China doesn't honestly think they can just walk into Taiwan anymore. They've seen the world will line up against them. So if Putin finds his back against the wall with no real allies, I am concerned that there is no one in the room to keep him away from the big red button.
That's the point. Yes. And you had another really good point, and that's Taiwan. I think there was a game plan, maybe not formally documented, so to speak, but Russia moves into Ukraine. It's a cakewalk, signals weakness by the West. China moves into Taiwan. I think this did the opposite, Dr. Lopp. I think it's more than a huge red flag.
It is. I think China will take a second look before simply invading Taiwan. And in all fairness, the credit for all of this has to go to Zelensky. He stepped up. He has become this generation's Winston Churchill. He motivated the Ukrainian people. He's inspiring the world to focus on stopping Russia once and for all. Putin has long said he wants to reassemble the Soviet Union. Now it looks like he may be responsible for permanently keeping Russia from regaining any empire.
True. Another concern I have, and I love your comment on this, is I hope we don't get a piling on. Things are not going well for Putin in Ukraine. They continue, let's just say, in the next couple of weeks to go worse and worse. Politics. People like to jump on. Join the bandwagon. That's also dangerous, isn't it?
It is, and I mean, we are facing, honestly, an unprecedented situation. There have been a lot of comparisons to World War II, but this is very different. One, we've never had to deal with a really rogue nuclear power before. And two, we've got multiple skirmishes popping up. We've had Iran firing missiles into Iraq. We've got everybody was keeping an eye on China and Taiwan. We don't know what North Korea is thinking right now. But even though they're sort of loosely connected, Russia, Iran, and China especially, there isn't a formal alliance. They're not coordinating these attacks. So we're actually looking at multiple fronts, multiple sides. It's a unique situation that we have never faced before.
Okay, never faced before is the operative word, so to speak. Isn't it some of this decline, weakness of the West?
Oh, absolutely. None of this would have happened had the West been perceived as still as strong as it ever was.
The woke military.
Yeah, the woke military, the reports that our Navy is not prepared for combat, Biden's disastrous withdrawal from Afghanistan, and the fact that Biden wanted to appease the Iranians for the treaty. The Biden administration also got back into a Russian weapons treaty that Trump pulled out of. There was no coverage of this. I didn't even hear about it till just recently. Biden sort of snuck us in, and then Putin ignored the treaty anyway.
Yeah, I mean, signing these, re-entering these treaties with Iran, with Russia, having Russian, moderate or intervene between us and Iran. It's something out of a bad, cheap novel, actually. It's perplexing, to say the least.
It is. And I mean, especially the refusal of the administration to open up America's energy industry and instead ask for help from Venezuela and Iran, who, aside from, completely dirty processes, that's environmentally the opposite of what American fuel would be, these are regimes that are funding terrorism. The U.S. government doesn't even recognize the government of Venezuela, and yet they're asking for help. This constant image of weakness is what caused all of this to happen.
But it's also a sign of mental retardation. Like, you got Pete Buttigieg, right, saying, in other words, just like the left, no bad situation cannot go exploited. You have to exploit every bad situation, either domestically or internationally. They're using this as a way to expand electric cars. And talk about being out of touch, Dr. Lopkin, when Biden was saying, now's the time to switch over to electric cars. How out of touch? I just bought my car a year ago. What am I just going to sell it? It would have no value because no one wants a gas car in their world, in their mind, and just go out and buy a Tesla for $50,000. No big deal.
Of course, when most families are actually struggling to put food on the table because of the increased fuel prices, the administration's solution is, go buy an electric car. Most families cannot afford an electric car. And there are other barriers to having electric cars. I mean, we're broadcasting this from central Connecticut. You can't get from here to New York and back in an electric car in a single trip. You actually have to spend 12 to 15 hours recharging it before you can come back. On top of that, local communities have actually stopped Tesla from opening service stations. So local areas are actually making it harder